Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Democracy requires every citizen to stand up and defend the country he or she loves, not an individual, not a political party. You see, democracy is not a right. It is not a guarantee either. It is not an inheritance. To preserve it, it requires vigilance. The biggest threat to any democracy is ignorance. John F. Kennedy said, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all." Hello everyone, I am MD, and this is the Fourth Branch program. Tonight, we will continue the discussion on why it is necessary, why it is important, why it is critical, why it is imperative that if you are a Republican constituent, to deny your Republican legislators, public officials, the victory during the midterm election. We began that discussion 4 days ago, and tonight we will continue the discussion and present you with a topic to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that your Republican representative do not have your interests at heart. Your Republican elected officials do not care about your well-being. So, in order to remedy the situation that the country is currently in, there is only one course of action: to act on behalf of your country, not of a political party. Yes, the Republican Party would suffer a loss, but the Republican Party loss is a gain for the United States of America. Stay with me for a moment. We'll be right back to continue the conversation tonight. We will talk about the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and we will show you with proof that indeed the Republican legislators and the Republican elected officials have done everything in their power to harm the country and to hurt the constituent. So it becomes our responsibility, we the people, to remedy the situation. I'll be right back. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. time, sound-minded individuals, decent and morally bound Americans take over the operation and the functioning of our government. For far too long, we have entrusted the legislators in Washington, in our respective states, to attend to the interest of the country. But indeed, they have violated our trust. They have instead attended to their selfish interests. And in the process, they have destroyed the very institution which have guaranteed a system of justice and protected our democracy. We, the people, do share some of the responsibility for the predicament as well, because some of those legislators, they have been in Washington for decades. Election in, election out, we voted them in office and we entrusted them a task to do, to work, to improve our well-being, to improve the standing of the country, to protect the Constitution. But instead, most of those legislators, they are in Washington working for those who paid for their campaign finance, ignoring the people. For instance, 62 times during the Obama tenure and twice already during the Trump administration, Republican legislators in Washington voted to get rid of the healthcare insurance, aka Obamacare. An insurance which currently provides health coverage to 20 plus million individuals. And it doesn't matter to the Republican, those individuals who lose the coverage. It doesn't matter to those Republicans in Washington that those individuals could only, quite a few of them, could only have gotten coverage for their pre-existing condition because of Obamacare. It just does not matter. Mitch McConnell, in an interview according to Bloomberg a few weeks ago, said if the Republicans keep the House, they will try once again to get rid of Obamacare. So we know that Republican legislators in Washington, congressmen and senators, they do not care about the constituent. They do not have the constituent best interest at heart. So it becomes necessary this November 6th, that is Tuesday, for Republican constituent to take matters into their own hands. Because just to vote your party is no longer an acceptable option, because the country is in dire needs of change. The country is in dire need of leaders. And as of date, the Republican legislature that we have elected and placed in Washington have proven beyond a reasonable doubt they do not attend to the affairs of the people. Donald Trump has been in the Oval Office for 2 years, and there is no lack of scandal, no lack of corruptions. And yet, there is not a single congressional investigation in Washington. We, the people, have been too disengaged in political discussion and in political debate. Yes, we have been deceived by the legislators. They have mastered the art of deception, the art of pinning one group against another, one party against another. But part of the blame is ours, because election in, election out, we, the people, keep electing the same individual back to Washington. Marcus Cicero, who is a Roman philosopher who lives in before Christ, said, any man can make mistakes, but only an idiot persists in his error. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We cannot continue to do the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. We already know, we've already established that the Republican legislators in Washington do not have our best interests at heart. So on Tuesday, November 6th, it becomes necessary for us to get rid of those Republican legislators, congressmen, and senators. It is not a matter for debate. It is not a matter that requires analysis. It is in black and white that the Republican legislators have had full control of the legislative branch for 8 years. Both Congress and the Senate have been in the hands of the Republicans. And that's what we have as a country. They have gone against the will of the majority every single opportunity that they have. During the Obama administration, Republican legislators, congressmen, senators, governors, mayors, they all were drumming the beat of reining in on national debt. The very first thing that they did, they added $2.2 trillion to the national debt for no reason whatsoever. The economy was doing great. Companies have had record profits, record revenue, and they borrowed. This is not money that the country had. They borrowed $1.5 trillion and they gave $1.2 trillion to large corporations and wealthy individuals. But here's the most troubling part. 60% of the people, the majority, said no, not to do that. They did anyway. Just last October 6th, 62% of the people in the country said no to the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. Republican legislator went forward anyway and put Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. Most everybody in the country approve of Obamacare. Those who are currently covered and those who get coverage from their employer. They all agreed that Obamacare is a great healthcare for those who cannot afford it and those who have pre-existing conditions. And Republican time and again and again and again, up to 64 times now, try to get rid of it. Yes, we know it is not an assumption. It is not a speculation. Republican legislators have worked against the wishes of the majority. They have worked against the will of the American constituent. So on November 6th, I urge you, Republicans, to go to the poll and vote your Republican legislators, governors, and mayors out of office. You would not continue to pay an employee who cannot or will not do the job, will you? It is time to recognize that your Republican legislators are not doing the job for which we voted for them. It is time. It is time to get rid of those individuals in Washington. The country needs to have in the legislative branch a party that can keep a check on the executive branch. And it is not the Republican Party. We already know that. For the past 2 years, everything that's done is okay. Corruption, scandal, everything is fine. Don't go anywhere. When we return, we will debate the issue that are plaguing the Environmental Protection Agency and show you that Republican legislators in Washington are responsible for the problem. They're not doing anything about it. One more reason we ought to get rid of the Republican legislators in Washington. I'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airways with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. That is the agency which has for task to protect the environment. Although it is broad, but two major aspect that we can relate to are the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. Those are pretty much the most simplistic way of explaining what the EPA ought to do. Now, it is a very important job, because the water that we drink and the air that we breathe, those are essential for our subsistence on this planet. If you can no longer breathe, or what you're breathing is unhealthy, and if you breathe it constantly, regularly, then it is without saying that you will get sick and you will eventually die. By the same token, if you keep drinking polluted water, it is a given fact that you will get sick and eventually that might kill you. So the EPA has an essential job. It was created in 1970 by Richard Nixon in order to protect our habitat, which is the planet Earth. There is only one. Now, there could be a time when technology would be advanced enough, then we can go someplace else. But as of date, and we don't have anything in sight today in terms of technology, in terms of travel, that can take us, mankind, to another place where the air is better, the water is better. So we ought to preserve this planet that we have. And that is the job the EPA ought to do. That is a very important job. That is a critical job. That is crucial to our own existence. Now, the argument may be lost in politics because most individuals, Republicans in particular, whenever a topic arises, if it being advanced by a Democrat, they automatically go against it without sometimes even understanding the implication. Even when going against it is to their own detriment, it is a proven fact that Republicans would argue to the death about things sometimes they have no idea because they hear it on Fox, which is usually the place you go to hear lies. They hear it from Republican pundits who do not even know how to spell their name, let alone talk about an important facts such as environmental agency. And that put the country at a big disadvantage. That's why when they talk about climate change, we have such a big problem. We're not here to talk about that, but that's something that's related to it. We'll talk about it at some other time. Scott Pruitt was the EPA administrator that was hired by Donald Trump on February 2017. By July 2018, he had to resign. But that's not what we're interested in. Of course, the reason he had to resign is because of all the scandals that have plagued his office. Him alone, for that 18-month period that he had as head of the EPA, he had racked up 21 investigations, 14 of them federal investigations. That's how corrupt that is. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That gentleman had managed during the time that he spent as head of the EPA to dismantle all the protection that the agency had put in place from Richard Nixon to Barack Obama. They have dismantled those protections. But as far as Republican constituents are concerned, because they've been listening to individuals who are very ignorant of the matter, and they think they're getting good information. Now, let's take a look at something extremely important, and we'll come back to continue the conversation about why we Americans should pay attention not just to the fact that the EPA administrator ought to do a job which protects us, but the legislators in Washington whose job is to exercise oversight. And since the Republican legislators are not doing it, it is imperative that this Tuesday, November 6th, if you Republicans, constituent, do not take this matter upon yourself, you may not live long enough to see the impact of what being done to the country. You may not live long enough to see what's being done to your kids, to your grandkids, to your great-grandkids. But it is a guarantee they will suffer the consequences of what today the Republican legislators are doing in Washington. Take a look.
Since its discovery in the 19th century, dinosaurs have been fascinating the world. Some were so large that their dimensions are hard to believe. Top 10 biggest dinosaurs. Number 10. Giganotosaurus. Like most of the great carnivores, it lived in the Cretaceous period, between 99 and 96 million years in Argentina. It measured 42 feet in length, 13 in height, and weighed 8 tons. His skull was a little more than 4.9 feet. It was so large that it was supposed to feed on Tyrannosaurus-sized prey. However, since its discovery in the 19th century,
wait a minute. What does dinosaur have to do with EPA?
Their dimensions are hard to believe. Top 10 biggest dinosaurs. Number 10. Giganotosaurus. Like most of the great carnivores, it lived in the Cretaceous period, between 99 and 96 million years in Argentina. It measured 42 feet in length, 13 in height, and weighed 8 tons. His skull was a little more than 4.9 feet. It was so large that it was supposed to feed on Tyrannosaurus-sized prey. However,
what does dinosaur have to do with EPA? Confused? Well, let me enlighten you. There is no more dinosaur today. If you care to guess why, it's because the environment was no longer conducive to their lives. As you can see, there are large animals. They need a lot to survive. They need to eat a lot. And they need a lot of food. But that's not what kills them. That's not lack of food that kills the dinosaur. It's the environment. The environment was no longer conducive for the dinosaur. Earthquake, tsunami, a bunch of natural disasters millions of years ago. Some just fall into the earth. Earthquake, they cannot run fast. They were too big to run fast. And if they fall into a small little hole, well, not really small, but you understand, based on their size, they fall into a hole. It's hard for them to get out of it. So they stay there and they starve to death. Sometimes they get buried even some more by more tremors of the earth. They get drowned. In other words, the environment was no longer conducive for the dinosaur. They disappeared. Now, if you're not putting two and two together, let me spell it out for you. When Richard Nixon got a report about, and it wasn't even as bad as it is today, as to how the air that we breathe, the water that we drank, was being threatened by pollutant, by residual chemical dumped by chemical companies, organizations, and so on. So the president signed an executive order, December 1970. Yes, the same Richard Nixon that had to leave office. He was smart enough to know that we ought to protect this habitat, the only place that we have, we human beings. There is no other. And what did the Trump administration do? Engage in destroying those same measures that were put in place to preserve mankind. They weren't put in place just because somebody felt like it, because it is necessary. When chemical company dump their chemical rejects into rivers, into our drinking water, would be just a matter of time before we get those chemical, those poison into our system. So it is not a speculation. Those measures were in place for a reason. So when you listen to those individuals like Sean Hannity, Lauren Graham, Tucker Carlson, people who actually you would think who could enlighten their audience, who could educate their audience, but instead taking them down a path to become dumber, listening to them than before they did. So it is not a matter for debate. But what is most troubling is not even those individuals who don't know what they're talking about, but it's rather the legislators in Washington, Republican legislators in Washington. They have been in control of both houses for 8 years now. During the 2 years that Trump has been in office, the Republican legislators in Washington have turned a blind eye to every single damage that's being done to the country. That's including damage to the only habitat we mankind have. If your neighbor, every time he had to throw his trash away, instead of using the norm of putting the trash in a bin, put it out to be picked up, what if instead your neighbor just threw the trash in your backyard? Would that be okay? Of course, it's a rhetorical question. I'm certain it would not be okay. While we, this generation, and quite possibly the next one, may not see the impact of what the EPA is doing by deregulating the agency, while we may not suffer the consequences or we may not see the impact of those actions, but it is a guarantee that your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids and beyond will pay a very heavy price for doing nothing. It is not gibberish. It is a fact that if you do not preserve, if you do not protect the air that we breathe, you do not protect the water that we drink, it is inevitable it will get into our system and it will pass down from one generation to the next. The consequences, nobody can say what it would be. But I can tell you one thing. The price that mankind will pay, while you may not be around to see it, but it would bring tears to your eyes to see that your kids, your grandkids, what they have to deal with. Some may not be as visible, but others may be born with an arm shorter than the other, a foot shorter than the other, one eye, or their head turned sideways. Yes, those are not movies when your system, your genes are modified by chemical and it's being passed from one generation to the other, what can happen is only your guess is as good as mine. But it's not that we do not have a way to stop the problem, at least to curb it. Currently, in Washington, Republican legislators have been in Washington for 8 years. Today, as of date, they have not conducted the Devin Nunes investigation. We already know what that was for. That wasn't an investigation to find anything wrong with the Trump administration. So don't come and use that as an example. But as of date, the Republican legislators in Washington have not conducted any investigation into the Trump administration. Things that they're doing, scandal, corruption. It's like you would think that's the best thing that has happened to the nation. And yet we know the Trump administration has had the most corrupt administration in the history of this country. Most of the people in his cabinet have been either indicted, pushed out because of corruption and scandal. So there is no argument for the Republican legislators in Washington to have as to why there is no investigation. But what is of concern to us today is the EPA. If you want to look at it from a realistic perspective, the EPA is probably one of the most important agencies that were created by a president. The best thing that has happened to America, the EPA. Remember, it's not just an individual, a Republican. Remember during the debate when Rick Perry actually had to bail out from running, from bidding for the presidency of the United States because EPA was one of the agencies he could not remember. Oops, moment. There is not another earth that we can live in. There is not another earth that we, mankind, can go to at this moment. And it's going to be a while, even if it is discovered that there is another planet similar to Earth that can host the type of life that we need to survive. At this point, there is no mode of transportation to take us there. In other words, we are stuck here where we are. And it needs to be protected. So when you hear your Republican representative, congressman, senator, governors, and so on, they are talking about deregulating the agency because it's bad for business. Regulation is bad for business. Which is best? Regulating the industry so that they don't pollute the water that we drink, they don't pollute the air that we breathe, or just let them run amok and destroy our lives. And for reasons that are beyond logic, it's sometimes impossible to understand how a sound-minded individual could go along with rationale like that. We depend on water. We cook with water, we drink water, we bathe with water. Now, some of you may say, well, I never drank that water from the faucet. So it doesn't apply to me. Do you use the water to cook? Do you use bottled water to cook? Do you use bottled water to take a shower? The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has a critical job to protect the environment, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. Before there was any kind of regulation put in place to prevent companies, which they don't care at all, to dump chemical into our river, the water that we drink. They were doing it as if there is no tomorrow, until they start being fined. And some of those companies, you might be surprised to learn, despite being fined millions of dollars, some of those companies continue to do that regardless, because they find it more cost effective. You know what that means? The government would slap them with a fee, the EPA that is, would slap them with a fee of $20 million. That's just an example. But they figured they would rather pay those $20 million than having to spend more money trying to take care of those residuals. It would cost them more money. So they call it cost effective. So despite those fees, despite those penalties, some of those companies, CEO, they don't practice any corporate responsibility. By the way, those are the same individuals that just got share of those $1.5 trillion we borrowed and called a tax cut for the people. Some of those individuals, they rather destroy our habitat. They rather pollute the water that we drink. They rather cause damage to the future generation because it is more cost effective. But they won the lottery because the EPA that we have today got rid of all those fees, all those penalties, and they say, just go ahead, dump trash into the rivers. It does not matter because there is no fee for you to pay. That's courtesy of the Republican administration, courtesy of the Republican Party. So you see, the Republican legislators you have elected, the Republican congressmen, senators, governors, mayors that we have put in office, they do not give a damn about our well-being. Our best interests are not their problems. They will burn down the country if it means to protect those companies which give them a check when they're running for election and re-election. They don't care about anything that we, the people, care about. Would you continue to employ an individual who cannot do the job or will not do the job or do the job badly? Would you? I'm certain you would not. Why should we continue to send those Republican legislators back to Washington in order to continue to do things that harm the country and that hurt us? Why would we do that? Any man can make mistakes. but only an idiot persists in his error. Any man can make mistakes. We made a mistake. We elected a bunch of self-serving individuals and sent them to Washington. Any man can make mistake, but only an idiot will persist in his error. Today, I urge you on Tuesday to make the decision to vote those Republican legislators, congressmen, and senators out of Washington because they contribute to harm the country and to hurt us, the constituent. They do not deserve to be rewarded for the bad behavior. They do not deserve to be rewarded for not doing the job for which they were elected. They ought to be voted out of office. I'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. November 6, 2018, that's this coming Tuesday. First, I urge you to set that time aside to go to the poll and to vote. It is important, it is critical, it is necessary, it is imperative. But I also urge you to be very vigilant because there are reported irregularities already in the system. Those early voters, particularly in the state of Texas, have found that when they vote, well, at least there was one instance of such. So I don't want to speculate about whether there are more, but at least one instance that the individual selected Beto O'Rourke, who is the challenger to Ted Cruz. And at the end, when she was presented with the screen, her vote for Beto was changed to Ted. Now, whether it was a glitch or that glitch was fixed, I'm not uncertain about that. But the fact remains that it had happened. So when you go to vote, and you should, whether it's before you go to work, during lunchtime, or after work, you should not miss the opportunity to vote on Tuesday. But you should also be very vigilant because irregularities do happen. And you want your vote to go to the individual you intended to go to. So be careful, go to vote, but have your eyes wide open because it is that important. This election, November 6th, which is this coming Tuesday, is critical. It is gonna be the chance to keep things the way you see them here. Do you like things the way they're going today? If not, you Republican constituent ought to vote your Republican legislators, congressmen, and senators out of office because the country can no longer rely on those individuals to protect what we have as a nation. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. You see, some people in some part of the country have already suffered because of pollution. You may recall that in 2014, there was a water crisis in Flint, Michigan. I'm not going to go and talk about all the detail that I already addressed in a previous program that we had earlier this morning at 10:30 a.m., which you can find also on the People Branch YouTube channel. We will provide that information also at the end of this program. But I will say this, Rick Snyder was the governor of Michigan at that time. After becoming aware of the problem, what do you think a governor, someone who was elected to improve the lives of individuals in his state, what would you as a governor ought to do when presented with a situation like this? That the water that the people in Flint were using at some point until they found out that was the case because the water becomes smelly, and it clearly was visible to some people that there was a problem with the water in Flint. Now, a governor would have automatically make that priority. On top of that, we were also expecting that the EPA would be very much involved in this process. Now, what did the governor do? The governor shrugged it off. He even went as far as saying, there is nothing wrong with the water. I drink the water. We know that was a lie. What you're currently looking at on your screen is the what the water looked like that was coming from the faucet. And you see people holding bottle and showing you exactly what they were getting. Rick Snyder, Republican governor, is no longer, but he was the Republican governor. The first job of a governor, a mayor, a senator, a congressman is to work towards improving the lives of your constituent. Just like you see the senator, the congressman in Washington today are doing things that hurt us, the constituent, that hurt the country. Because borrowing $1.5 trillion, you cannot call that something good for the country or for the constituent. But as master of deception, the Republicans have always come and sell a story to the constituent, and Republican constituents are really very open, gullible to just get what they told. And on top of that, they amplify whatever message that they have. They go to places like Fox, where they have Sean Hannity, Lauren Graham, Tucker Carlson, the whole gang. Of course, that's not to say there are not others, because you have other Rush Limbaugh and so on doing the same thing as well. But Fox is the big mouthpiece that Republicans use to conduct the propaganda that they want to reach as many Republican constituents as possible, and to tell them how great of a tax cut is going to be. But what always puzzles me is the fact that it's not one time, twice, three times. It's every time. How many times do someone have to lie to you in order to figure that out? They did the same thing under the George Bush administration. I don't know if you recall, but under the Bush administration, it was a scenario slightly different, because Bill Clinton left the country with a surplus, so the Bush administration simply used that surplus, wipe it out. That doesn't mean it was okay, but at least we didn't have to borrow that money. But under the Trump administration and the Republican legislators, we had to borrow $1.5 trillion to give to large corporations and wealthy individuals. So we know that Republican legislators, they do not have our best interest at heart, because they prove it over and over and over again. I understand that. I've learned that, and I've seen it, and there is no reason for you not to be able to understand that your Republican representative do not have your best interest at heart. Up to today, those people in Flint are still coping with a water crisis. It had improved a little bit, a tad, but we still have that problem. Now, I don't know what it would take exactly to get this, what I consider a very simple decision to be made. You employ someone to do the job. The person doesn't do the job or cannot do the job. You get rid of that individual and hire somebody else. It is that simple. I understand that the Republican legislators, they have become so good at deception. Remember when they were drumming the beat of tax cut for the people. I remember that very clearly. Paul Ryan had press conference and said, the people deserve a tax cut. We're going to give them a tax cut. And Mitch McConnell and all the gang. Now, I know they were lying. And they know they were lying to us. And the reason I know that is because while they were out there drumming that beat of tax cut for the people, they were crafting at the same time, crafting legislation that clearly say 1.2 trillion, 85%, actually 90%, almost 90% of that money they were borrowing were going to go to large corporations and wealthy individuals. So they actually were deceiving us on purpose. It wasn't a mistake that they were making because they were all out there saying it's a tax cut for the people. Paul Ryan was very vocal about the whole thing. Yes, the people deserve a tax cut. Why not? They do deserve a tax cut. But while he was saying that, he was also involved in crafting legislation that number one, those legislations said $1.2 trillion would go to large corporations and wealthy individuals. Only $300 billion will be distributed among the people. That's number one. Number two, in the same legislations, it is clearly documented that we, the people, not the large corporation who receive the 85% of the money, not the wealthy individual, we, the people, are responsible for the whole $1.5 trillion. So, it is not a speculation, it is not an assumption that Republicans time and again prove they do not have our best interest at heart. But what makes the situation even more troubling is when we talk about EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the agency which protects our way of life. You cannot live without water. You cannot live without breathing the air. We're not amphibian. Turtles are. I guess at this point, we wish we were turtle. Then again, it wouldn't make any difference because the water also is polluted. It's being polluted. And we have the Republican legislators who just turn a blind eye. Deregulation because, yes, it's good for business. It's not good for our health. It's not good for future generation. So we, the people, have the opportunity this time to tell the legislators, the congressmen, the senators, the governors, the mayor, to tell them very clearly, we Republicans are tired of being hurt by your actions. It's time for you to go. It is that simple. There is nothing to think about. There is nothing to analyze. Those are information that are readily available for all of us to see. They've been doing that for decades now. It's time that we, the people, and if we participate in this process more frequently, maybe, just maybe, legislators would start to do what we, the people, want. Because we keep voting those underperformers, those bad employees, we keep rewarding them. For the people of Flint, it's not a conversation piece. It wasn't a conversation piece, still not, because they're still coping with the aftermath of the situation. It wasn't a conversation piece. It was their lives. Lead were found in the water. And you know what lead does? It decreases your level of intelligence. And if you're a child, the younger you are, the more pronounced that problem will show. At that time, Michigan had a Republican governor who could have done something faster, who would have considered that as a matter of priority, but instead shrug it off. Well, I drank the water. How bad can it be? It is not to your benefit to vote your party, because on November 6th, if you vote Republican, consider that you are part of the problem the country is confronting today. You become part of the problem. You cannot vote your party and think you're doing something good for the country. Because when you are in possession of knowledge and information and you make the wrong decision, you ought to pay the price for it. Your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids will certainly do. Now, you may have instant gratification because, well, yeah, I vote for Republican and Republican won. That victory is not worth celebrating because it comes with a heavy price. Life, your health first, your life second. As I mentioned, you may not live long enough to see the impact of what the Republican legislators are doing today to the nation, to our health. Because their job is to exercise oversight over agencies like the EPA, and they're not doing that. Instead, do you think Scott Pruitt would have spent that much time as EPA administrator if the Republican legislators were doing their job? It is necessary on November 6th to vote Republicans out of office. You would not keep an employee who cannot perform. You would not keep an employee who is unwilling to perform. You would not keep an employee who simply doesn't care. There is no justification for Republican constituent to go to the poll on Tuesday, November the 6th, that is this coming Tuesday, and to vote their Republican official back in office. You do, you become part of the problem. I'll be right back. Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. ignorance is the biggest threat to our democracy. However, the greatest threat is the fact that the ignorant are ignorant of their own ignorance. The revered leader lies to everyone about everything. Their admired spokesmen and spokeswomen speak deliberately to misguide them, to misinform them, to mislead them. How does one get out of ignorance when he is subscribed to listen to other ignorant? It's much like a blind leading a blind, says the Bible. We know it is so. According to a survey conducted a few months ago, more than 82% of those who are faithful viewers of Fox are ignorant of facts and the truth. When half the nation goes nuts, it is time for the sound-minded individual to redouble their effort, for the country is not divided between Democrats and Republicans. No, it is not. It is divided between those who seek knowledge and those who choose to stay and live in ignorance. The country is divided between those who seek the truth and wisdom and those who promote and enjoy falsehoods. Those who make use of their brains and those who have outsourced theirs. The United States of America is in dire need of a leader who knows the way, shows the way, and indeed is willing to go all the way. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. I do thank you to have spent the time with me. And I do encourage you on November 6th to go to the poll, because it is that important. It is that critical. Join me again on Monday at 2 p.m. when we will continue to bring you topics of importance in order to prove that there is justifiable and verifiable reason to get rid of the Republican legislators this November the 6th. We have been providing those examples. Again, those information are readily available on the People Branch YouTube channel, which we'll provide shortly. But we will continue Monday at 2 p.m. to bring you another topic and show to you that indeed the Republican legislators and elected officials do not have our best interests at heart. So it becomes our responsibility to get rid of the underperformers, to get rid of those who fail to do the job for which they were elected. We cannot reward someone who cannot do the job or will not do the job. So join me again at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, and we will continue the conversation. In the meantime, I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever that is for you. The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.